Hey people, welcome back to the Bricks with Tips YouTube channel. My name is Tayo Oguntonode, co-founder of Bricks with Tips, which I run with my wife Antoinette. We're also the co-founders of the Home Buyers Club, which you're going to hear about a bit later in this video. But in this video, we're going to talk about all of the government schemes that exist to help you get on the property ladder. Now, if you're not familiar with Bricks with Tips, to give you some context, Antoinette and I have been on the property ladder and in property for coming up to 10 years now, and we ran our platform Bricks with Tips for over 5 years. Now, Bricks with Tips exists to help you achieve your goals in your property journey and for you to be better with your money in general and build wealth. So this video serves as a guide where you can find out about all of the government schemes in one video. Now, if you're looking for a specific government scheme, as you know, we've sectioned it off on YouTube, so you can find that one directly by just clicking below and finding out the scheme that you want to go to. But if you want to listen to all of them and see what suits you, make a cup of tea, stretch out your feet, recline the chair, whatever you're doing, just sit tight and we're going to go through it in a lot of detail. Now, before we get into it, I want to make it clear why the government has government schemes, because sometimes in order to understand how these schemes work, you want to have an idea of the motive from the government as well. Now, you see at work when you've got key performance indicators, right, to see how you're doing your job, basically. The measures that are going to be looked at to ensure that you're doing your job correctly. The government kind of has this too, and economic stability is one of them. And economic stability and the growth of personal wealth can be enhanced by making home ownership a possibility for more and more people. In short, it's very well known that buying your first home can be the introduction of wealth into your family. And put simply, this makes the government look good. The means at which they get you in that first home, they vary. Let's look at them. Right, guys, so it's no surprise that one of the first schemes we're going to be looking at today is shared ownership. Shared ownership is probably, I think, the most popular government scheme out there by far. If you think government scheme, a lot of people think shared ownership. So what is shared ownership? Well, it's kind of in the name, right? Shared ownership. You own, but that owning is shared. But shared with who? Shared with what? Let's get into it. In effect, shared ownership is part rent, part buy, because you buy a share of a property and rent the remainder. So let's look at an example. If I, Tayo, was looking at a 400k flat that was on shared ownership, I could buy a 25% share of that flat. So 400k flat, I actually only buy 100k worth of that flat. And the remaining 300k, I would rent. So we've got the buy side and we've got the rent side. So let's look at the rent side first, right? So I'm renting 300k worth of flat. How much is that actually going to cost me on a monthly basis? Well, luckily, you can actually work that out. So the rent is typically capped at 3%, but most landlords charge 2.75%. So to work out the annual rent, you do 2.75% of 300k, which is £8,250. And then to find out the monthly rent, you just divide that by 12, which is £687.50. Done. That's the monthly rent you'll pay for the portion you don't own to the housing association. Now, let's look at the 100k that you buy. One of the reasons that shared ownership is so popular is because of the low barriers to entry, right? So shared ownership, you're allowed to put down a 5% deposit on the portion that you're buying. So 5% of that 100k portion that you're buying, which means that you can put down a deposit of just £5,000 and control a flat that's worth 400k. Because remember, let's take it from the top. 400k flat, you buy 25% of it, which is 100k. Then you put down a 5% deposit, which is just £5,000. Now, this does mean that you're going to need to get a mortgage for £95,000. So if we consider a 25-year mortgage at 5% for £95,000, the mortgage payments would be roughly £556 per month. So you've got your mortgage payments and you've got your rent payments. Now, the purpose of shared ownership and why it was created is that it can help people on the journey to 100% ownership. So in the example we gave, we bought 25%, but you can actually buy more percentages of the property in a process called staircasing. Simply put, at a stage later, you could buy another 25%, maybe in 2 years' time, you buy another 25%, and then maybe 1 year after that, you buy the final 25% to get you to 100% ownership. So when you first approach that 400k property and you buy 25% of it, you have two options where stamp duty is concerned. You can choose to pay the stamp duty for the whole 400k, or you can choose to pay stamp duty only for the percentage that you're purchasing. Why does this make a difference? If you pay stamp duty on the 25% that you're purchasing right now, which is the 100k, that's set in stone, right? And that's recorded. However, when you staircase, the chances are that the value of the property is not 400k. It's most likely gone up, but it may have gone down as well. So that's going to have an impact on the amount of stamp duty that you pay, depending on where you are in the threshold anyway. Remember, first-time buyers as well as existing buyers can buy through shared ownership. There are other things to think about when buying shared ownership properties as well. So for example, when you're going through the conveyancing process, solicitors typically charge a bigger fee, not only for a leasehold property, but specifically for shared ownership transactions as well. And then when it comes to selling your shared ownership property, there can be some fees associated with that too. But let's go into pros and cons. So the pros of shared ownership are obvious, right? Lower initial costs. You could put down a fraction of a deposit, quite literally, because you're buying through shared ownership, which means that so many people who were struggling to save for a deposit because of the increased costs of living and things like that are now able to do so through putting down a fraction of a deposit through shared ownership. So that is one of the reasons why the scheme is hugely popular. It also has the flexibility, or I like to say, the option to staircase. You don't have to. A lot of people will just buy 25%, pay down that mortgage, hopefully let the equity grow, and sell 25% to another shared ownership person that's interested in buying through shared ownership that only wants 25%. Because one thing you need to realize is that when you staircase to 50%, to 75%, the pool of people that can afford your share reduces significantly. When you're at 25%, it's kind of like, yes, you still get the benefits of shared ownership and you can pass those benefits to someone else who only wants to buy a 25% share of a property effectively. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't staircase, but I say that if you want to staircase with the clear intention of trying to get to 100%. As at 75%, you're so close to 100%, and the buyers that are at 75% probably will just buy 100% of a property elsewhere. And then the other pros of shared ownership is that you've got reduced mortgage costs and you've got quick access to the market. The cons of shared ownership: limited equity, right? You're only buying a share of it. So when house prices do increase, you're only getting 25% of the increase you would have got if you bought outright. So I think it's still great that you're an owner, but it is limited effectively. Another con is service charges, right? Service charges have got really, really bad reputations. I think when you're buying properties, try and find out who the housing association is or who's in charge of the service charges, and try and pay attention to the history of increases when it comes to service charges or what the money has been spent on previously. Another con is that there's often restrictions on selling. Sometimes selling can be hard. Sometimes the housing association intervenes so much it makes it difficult to sell. Please go online and check reviews of selling shared ownership properties, as it can be difficult, but we're big fans in saying that if you know something is going to be difficult or you fully understand the con, doing research on how to overcome it can sometimes turn it into one of your strengths, basically, compared to everybody else in the market. Here is a big con. Sometimes people say that you've got all of the responsibilities of an owner, but the restrictions of someone who's renting a property. There's been a lot of reports where people feel that shared ownership does feel like renting under the guise of being someone that owns, basically, because you have all the responsibilities when it comes to it, so maintenance, repairs, and so on and so forth. But there are still some things that you may need to ask permission from the housing association for before you complete it effectively. Whereas someone who bought a property outright, well, not outright, but bought 100% of a property, wouldn't have to ask for those things. So here's our conclusion, right? Shared ownership can be beneficial for people that have limited upfront costs, but in actual fact, the long-term monthly costs can be quite substantial when you consider service charges, mortgage payments, and rent all put together. Who would I say that shared ownership is for? I'd say shared ownership is for somebody who lives in a major city with shared ownership properties available, but they're struggling to buy, save for a deposit, simply because work is too much or they've got other costs. And I always say they need to be in that major city as well. And I say need, not want, right? Need as in they've got family that support them, or maybe they live with family that has support in that major city effectively. Anyways, what I mean is that there's the need to be in that city, and the only way to get on the property ladder in that city is through shared ownership, because saving by normal means might take 10 years or 12 years or 15 years. If that is the case and you fit that profile, then shared ownership could work out for you, but just be very, very comfortable with what the cons are and try and have a way to overcome these cons as they are mentioned as well. Cool. Next up, right to buy. So, right to buy is one of the most longest standing government schemes there is out there. It was founded in the 1980s, and how it works, it allows council tenants to buy their properties that they're living in at a significant discount. And that discount is currently at £136,400. Crazy. Now, that £136,400 applies if you live in London. If you're outside London, it's still a whopping £102,400. So let's get into it. How does right to buy work? How are you eligible? So to be eligible for right to buy, you need to be a council tenant, and you need to have been a council tenant for 3 years. Now, those 3 years need to be cumulative, but not simultaneous. So you could have 1 year, then a 2-year gap, and then you could be a council tenant for another 2 years. Cumulatively, it equals 3 years, so you would be eligible. How it works, simply put, discount, money. They don't give you the cash, right? But they reduce the cost of which the property would be bought at effectively. So if you were a council tenant living in your property that was worth £350,000 and you were eligible for the maximum discount of £136,400, your property will be discounted to £213,600, a massive discount. Now, this discount is so great. Let's consider the typical first-time buyer that had a 10% deposit on a 350k house. They're putting down 35k, which means that they only need to get a mortgage on the property for £315,000. Now, your discount is so great. You're basically putting down a deposit of £136,400. Even though you're not putting any cash, a lot of lenders see that as such a great amount that they're going to say, hey, do you know what, Mr. Man, you don't need to put down anything whatsoever. We've gone from a property that's worth £350,000 all the way down to £213,600. Now, this is good for me. I'm just going to lend the money. I don't need evidence that you've put down cash. The government has given you such a big discount that we're just going to lend £213,600. Yes, with right to buy, in some cases, your deposit can be so great that a lender says you don't need to put down a penny towards a deposit. That's super, super important for people to hear. All you need to do is speak to a mortgage broker that can help you find the lenders that will allow you to do that. And yeah, man, that's right to buy in a nutshell, really. The pros, massive, whopping discount, and gives an opportunity for people who may be on lower incomes the chance to buy their council home, which is super, super important. The cons of right to buy, it's more of a limitation, right? Because a limitation is a con. And I guess the only limitation of right to buy is that you have to buy the flat or property that you're currently living in. So it's not like you can apply right to buy to the open market. It has to be the home that you're currently living in. And sometimes that doesn't work for people, right? Sometimes people aren't massively comfortable in the home that they're living in. So even though they've got £136,000 discount, they're not that keen on it. But I mean, if you ask me, 136k off, I'll make myself interested. You know what I'm saying? I'll make myself comfortable. But that's me. That's a story for another day. Guys, that concludes the pros and cons of right to buy. I guess the conclusion will be as follows. Right to buy for a number of years has been instrumental in many families building wealth. Families that were previously living in a council home. And that's mainly because the huge discount bridges a huge gap in finances effectively and allows them to buy their first home, and then eventually they can move on into a bigger home potentially, and so on and so forth. Now, it's worth noting that if you sell the property within the next 5 years after you've applied and been approved for right to buy, you may have to pay some of that discount back. But in the main, once again, right to buy can be a hugely useful tool for council tenants that want to get on the property ladder. Next, right to acquire. Now in the main, right to acquire is very, very similar to right to buy. It's just not as good. So right to buy is your council home. Right to acquire is for housing association tenants, right? Council tenants, housing association tenants. 136,400. Right to acquire is between £8,000 and £16,000 discount, effectively. As a result, there's no real lenders that will say, oh, because you're getting 8K, you don't have to put a deposit down. There might be, speak to a mortgage broker, but it's not widely reported. The amount of discount that you'll get between the 8,000 and 16,000 depends on where you live. And if you go on the government's website for right to acquire, you can find all of the details there. So how it works, you need to be a housing association tenant for over 3 years, and the property needs to have been built after 1997. Now the pros, £8,000 to £16,000, still a huge amount of money. Not as big as 136,400, but still a good amount of money. The cons, similar to right to buy, is restrictions through limitations because it's limited to the house that you are currently living in. Conclusion, very similar to right to buy. Yeah, good discount, good head start on equity. But the only difference is that at a maximum discount of 16,000 and a minimum of 8,000, you may find yourself asking, is a discount great enough to bind me to this area or this particular property? I know that sounds crazy, but areas differ, and some areas will actually make you think, you know what? I'd rather start again, start anew, maybe buy a cheaper property that doesn't come with a discount, but at least it's an area that I like or an area I can see my kids have grown up in or whatever that may be. So that's the main thing to consider. Next up, the first home scheme. The first home scheme, I wouldn't say it's the most popular, but I think that when you do like a blurb of a government scheme, the first home scheme would be the one that many people would click on first when it comes to a blurb or a little preview of what the scheme entails. Because the headline of the first home scheme is this: 30 to 50% off the first home for first-time buyers. So why isn't everyone running and doing the first home scheme? We're going to tuck into it right now. So in a nutshell, the first home scheme is a scheme where you can get 30 to 50% off your first home. And this is for key workers and first-time buyers. And it's only on new build properties. So once again, the government's combined or collaborated with home builders to offer this scheme because it's only on new build properties. And yeah, you would expect so, because you wouldn't be able to just go to a neighbor down the street and say, look, the government gave me 50% off your home. It's got to be on vacant homes that have been built by a home builder with the intention to be applied to the first home scheme. So yes, it's not actually clickbaity. 30 to 50% off homes for first-time buyers and key workers. But the key thing to mention is that these discounts are applied on the homes forever. Let's look at an example. So if you were to buy a property for, let's just say, 400,000 and you got a 50% discount through the first home scheme because you were a first-time buyer and also a nurse as a key worker in the local area, and they said, yeah, 50% off, you would be able to buy that property for £200,000. Amazing. 50% off a property. But let's just say that when you were selling, if at the time you were selling the property increased to, let's just say, £420,000, right? That's what the property increased to. So it increased by 20,000 while you were in the property. You would have to sell at a 50% discount again because the discount is applied to the property forever. So even though the property is worth 420,000, you would have to sell it for 210,000. So you would still walk away with some equity because you'd have 10,000 on top because you bought it for 200,000 and now you're selling it for 210,000. So you would make £10,000. However, important to note, the discount stays on the property forever. Now, to be eligible, the property needs to be your first home and you need to live in it. And it needs to be your only home. And you need to be a first-time buyer, and you'll have more luck getting a first home through the first home scheme if you are a key worker. Also, if you're in the local area as well. You must not earn more than £80,000 or more than £90,000 if you live in London. So what are the pros? Lower initial deposit, half price. Property half price, that means that you only put down a deposit on, in the example you gave, 200,000 rather than looking for a deposit for a £400,000 property. And I guess one of my pros for this particular scheme is that you get to live in a property that is in an area that represents a 400k property, or property that's the size of a 400k property, or the property that has the je ne sais quoi of a 400k property, but you only pay 200k for it. I mean, can't really go wrong with that, right? Now the limitations, unfortunately, you have to apply that discount when you sell the property. That is a huge limitation when you think about it. And the final limitation is a bit of a weird one. The first home scheme isn't readily available. Like, even though we've spoken about it, you can't just go out there and apply for it. Well, you can, or you can try to, but they're rolling it out really, 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 really slowly. However, if you're watching this, it may be applicable in your area. So if that sounds of interest, please do check. Conclusion. I'm going to go out and say it. Waiting around for a scheme to be available in the area that you want to buy is a surefire way to not get on the property ladder. If you're interested in the first home scheme and you, how do I put it? This is your way of getting on the property ladder, but it's not available in your area just now, I would advise against waiting. The reason why I say that is that there's been plenty of times where a scheme has sounded nice and it's been scrapped or it wasn't rolled out correctly or whatever it may be. And for context, with the first home scheme in particular, I think it was announced or launched in 2021. And within 2 years, there was only 35 completions nationwide. So it's something that's been really, really rolled out very, 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 very slowly. So don't be dependent on it, but do check it out if it's available in your area. You like the sound of it, you like the pros, which I mentioned, then feel free to pull the trigger on it. Next up, help to build. Not help to buy, help to build. Now you should know that help to buy has been scrapped. They may bring it back in the future, but for now it's been scrapped. But help to build still lives. Help to build lives in the shadows. Not many people know about it, but I think based on its principles, I'm a little bit of a fan of help to build if you are interested in self-build properties. So help to build is a government scheme that helps people that want to build self-build homes. So that can be a number of things. It could be buying the land and building on top of a land, or it could be buying a home, destroying the home that's on the land and building a new property. One of those two things or variances between them, but self-build in the main. How it works is very similar to help to buy. So let's break that down. You can get an equity loan from the government, 20% equity loan if you're based outside London, and up to 40% equity loan if you're based inside London. The equity loan can be used for the build costs and the land costs when it comes to a self-build property. The loan that they give you does not have to be repaid within the first 5 years, and it's interest-free for the first 5 years. After the first 5 years is when the government start charging interest on that equity loan. You will need to get a mortgage for the remaining amount that the equity loan doesn't cover. So with that being said, let's look at an example. Let's look at an example for a 400k property, because we've been working on 400k a lot during this video. And 400k is nowhere near the average house price in the UK, but it's a nice chunky number for all of these government schemes that we can split up and just makes it easier to understand, you know? So 400k property, what you could come in and do is put a 5% deposit down, which is £20,000. If the property is in London, you can get an equity loan for 40%, which is £160,000. So 20k from you, 160k from the government, then you'll go to your mortgage lender and get a mortgage for £220,000, which represents 55% of the remaining amount of the property. So that 160k, remember, is interest-free for the first 5 years. Then after the 5th year, they start charging interest on it. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with an equity loan, here's how it works in simple enough terms, right? It's not a normal loan, it's an equity loan. So that means that the amount that you pay back can vary. If the property was to increase by 20% to 480,000, what that means is that the amount that you have to pay back the government in the equity loan increases as well. Because it's an equity loan, they're sharing the equity with you. So if your property increased by 20% to £480,000, your equity loan would also increase from £160,000 to £192,000. So you'd have to pay them back more. Now this annoys a lot of people, and I kind of get it, but business is business, right? Sometimes when you're operating a business away from property, you may borrow money and have to pay them back more because that's the price paid to access that business opportunity, which you knew you were going to make money from. Put simply, you only pay the government more money if you made money as well. The reason why I say that, and let's just look at equity loans for what they are. Let's forget about help to build for a second. If you bought a property and got an equity loan at 400k, you would have put down £20,000, 160k from the government, 220k from the mortgage lender. If you waited for 5 years and the property was exactly the same price at 400k, you would, obviously ignoring fees, you would walk away with the £20,000 that you put in the first place, right? And for simplicity with that example, let's just imagine that your mortgage balance doesn't change as well, but typically your mortgage balance would go down. But we want to focus on the equity loan and the deposit that you put down. So let's look at the example that we just gave. If the property increased by 20% to 480,000 and you sold at that point, even though you would have to give the government back more money, you still make more money. That's because 480,000 minus the 220k that you pay your mortgage back with, provided we're assuming it doesn't change, and minus the 192,000 that your equity loan has increased to, would leave you with £68,000 rather than the £20,000 that you would have had if the prices stayed the same. But before we move on, equity loans can go the other way as well, because if the property goes down for one reason or another, right, in an equity loan, and once again, let's step away from self-builds for a second. If the property prices go down, you actually can end up paying back less than what you actually borrowed from the government. But please do remember, in this example, you would have lost money as well. Right, guys, back to Help to Build. So with Help to Build, you need to intend to have lived in the property, and it needs to be your only home by the time the self-build has completed. The pros of self-build. Self-builds are typically very, very expensive because you have to put a lot of money to buy land and build on it, right? The equity loan can make self-builds a reality for so many people that wanted to do it. By doing a self-build, you've got more control over what the property will look like. You can do the property to your own design. It can have all of the latest technology as well. The cons of a self-build. Self-build projects can take a lot of time. They can be extremely stressful. And if your equity loan doesn't get paid off in the first 5 years and we start getting interest charged on it, it can be another added expense on top of your mortgage that you have already. Our conclusion. Self-builds can be super, super important and helpful for people that want to build their own home. The difference between Help to Buy and Help to Build is that when Help to Buy came about, everybody had the idea that they were going to see their property go up in value and then refinance their mortgage and use that refinance to pay off the equity loan, which was, yeah, it works for some people. But the problem with that, and when it comes to new builds, is that when it comes to new builds, you're buying someone else's finished products, right? Value's already been added. When it comes to self-builds in Help to Build, you're the one adding the value. So I say all of that to say, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to refinance your home and pay back your equity loan because you're adding so much value in the build process, or where we should be. Right, guys, hopefully you're still with me. The final scheme, and don't leave just yet because we're going to release some very, very important secrets and tips right at the end of this video. But the final scheme, lifetime ISA, the lifetime ISA, or the LISA. The lifetime ISA was introduced in April 2017, and it's there to help first-time buyers save more money towards their first home. How it works is that you can contribute £4,000 per year up until you turn 50 years old, and the government will give a 25% bonus on savings up to £4,000 per year. So in effect, you can get free £1,000 from the government per year on your savings. Now, the key thing is that the money in a lifetime ISA has to be used to buy a new home, or if not, it has to be used for retirement. If it's used for anything else, or you need to pull the money out for anything else, you will face penalties, and those penalties can end up you withdrawing less money than you put in the first place. Now, there are many providers of lifetime ISAs, and it's a key thing to note that a provider will offer an interest rate and you will get the government bonus as well. So a provider may say, open a lifetime ISA with us and we'll give you a 3% interest rate. On top of that, the government's going to give you the 25% bonus as well. So it's a really, really good opportunity to maximize your savings. But you need to know about these pros and cons. So the pros, of course, 25% bonus and interest. And the great thing is that a lifetime ISA is flexible. You can have a cash lifetime ISA where, as mentioned, the provider can say, yeah, here's a 3% interest rate. Or you can even have a stocks and shares lifetime ISA. So you could have a lifetime ISA that invests in a bunch of different stocks and shares. So even though it may be more volatile, the returns, the potential returns can be a lot higher than the 3%. Obviously, your money is at risk when it comes to investing. The cons of a lifetime ISA is that there are some limitations. It can only be used to buy a house or to retire. If you withdraw money, as mentioned before, you can pay a penalty. The other thing to note is as well is that when you open a lifetime ISA, it has to be open for 12 months before you can use it. So if you were to open it today and put 4K into it and you want it to come buy a house in 3 months' time, when you try and withdraw your money, you're going to pay a penalty and end up with less money than you put in, because your lifetime ISA needs to be open for at least 12 months to benefit from it. That's why they often say, open a lifetime ISA today, put £1 in today to get it started. And I'm going to put some links in below where you can open a lifetime ISA and get started today. The reason why that's super important is that even if you don't want to buy a property right now, in 3 years' time, you may want to buy a property and you've got your deposit. Maybe it came from inheritance. Maybe it came from a bonus from work. You could simply get free £1,000 by putting in 4K. The provider will add the government will add a £1,000 bonus, and then you take the money out the next day. A free 1K at a late. Protect your future self. Protect your future self by opening a lifetime ISA today with £1. That way, the 12 months is expired. Other limitations: you cannot open a lifetime ISA if you're over 40 years old, and you cannot use your lifetime ISA on a property that's worth over 450k. So if your property falls over that 450k mark, then it's going to cost you money. You're going to face the penalties to withdraw those funds. Conclusion. Yeah, the conclusion on this one is that the lifetime ISA is a no-brainer. So long as you're aware of all of the cons, mate, lifetime ISA can give you free money when it comes to buying your first home. Right, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Look, when it comes to schemes, we like to break down schemes into 3 sections, which is government schemes, developer schemes, and mortgage lender schemes. And for every one of those government schemes, there's at least one lender scheme and at least one developer scheme. Now, you can find all these schemes on our new platform called the Home Buyers Club. We've got a document where you can download it for free through the Home Buyers Club. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Home Buyers Club also has videos breaking down all of these schemes in detail, as well as the schemes for developers and the schemes for lenders as well. And there's also many other videos on the whole home buying process. We've got different modules like the Home Buyers Blueprint, we've got navigating home buyer schemes, we've got introduction to property investing. You also have live webinars and physical events, and you can also book one-to-ones with myself through the platform, all for a very small subscription. If you are interested in the Home Buyers Club, click the link that's coming on screen right now, or click the link in the description, and you can join the waiting list, or if the waiting list is open at the moment, you can join straight away. Guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment, say what you like. Did you enjoy it? Did you like the teaching style? And yeah, we will see you on the next one very soon. Peace.